Glad we can be together tonight. Let's see, turn this. There we go. Glad we can be together and have opportunity to study about Jesus. Before we do, insofar as our readings are concerned, we are reading from Proverbs chapters, 16, 17, 18, 19 would be the 10th through the 21st of Proverbs, 10th chapter through the 21st. We'll go through fairly quickly. And what I'd like to do tonight is you'd call, maybe I'll call attention to one or two, but I'd like for you to pick out, if you've highlighted some proverbs that are helpful, meaningful to you. Remember, the word proverb is, we could summarize it by saying it means a general what? A general truth, yes. And in chapter 10, what's one that strikes at you? Anybody?
Wisdom in the son makes the father glad.
Exactly. The very first verse. A wise son makes a glad father, but a foolish son is a heaviness of his mother. And I believe most all of us understand that. One thing that ought to cause us to pause in verse 19, in the multitude of words there wanteth not transgression, but he that refraineth his lips doeth wisely. Maybe it's not completely on this subject, but James 1, let every man be swift to hear. What's the rest of it? Slow to speak, slow to wrath. There are some people who are just known for being a chatterbox, and that can oftentimes get people in trouble. Chapter 11, verse 1, a false balance is an abomination. A false balance is someone who, to weigh a certain product, they would put what should be a true balance in one side, and then as the scales would equalize, then you would know exactly what was on the other side. But a false balance means that the weight is what? It's rigged. It's rigged. And so a person who provides a false balance is actually doing what to his customer? He's cheating them, yes. It's an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. Let's see. What now? Anything else in chapter 11?
11 and 22.
Yes. As a ring of gold in the swine's snout, so is a fair woman that is without discretion. That's a great one. Be careful what we say, how we say it. That reminds me just the opposite of that one, Janet, in Proverbs 31, the worthy woman. Out of her mouth cometh forth wisdom, and the law of kindness is on her tongue, I think is how it's reflected. All right, to chapter 12, verse 4. A worthy woman is the crown of her husband, but she that maketh ashamed is his rottenness in his bones. A lot about husband-wife relationships and our behavior in each. Verse 15, the way of the fool is right in his own eyes, but he that is wise hearkeneth unto counsel. Of course, divine counsel would be the objective case. Verse 22, lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but they that deal truly are his delight. Anything else that you can?
19.
Verse 19, the lip of truth shall be established forever, but a lying tongue is but for a moment. Yeah, lies usually are found out, aren't they? Eventually, lies come to light. Not maybe even during the lifetime of some who tell them, but eventually lies come out. All right, 13:1. A wise son hears his father's instruction, but a scoffer hears not rebuke. A lot said concerning the father and son in the book of Proverbs. And I think we mentioned earlier in class, who's writing I just told you. Who's writing Proverbs? Solomon. And David, others would be the ones to whom he writes, primarily David, I think. Verse 11 of chapter 13, a wealth gotten by vanity shall be diminished, but he that gathereth by labor shall have increase. that just basically says somebody ill-gotten gains, doesn't it? They're usually what happens, kind of like lying is usually what? It's usually found out. Yeah. Verse 15 of chapter 13 is a great statement. And we see this so much. Good understanding gives favor, but what? Yeah, the way of the transgressor is hard. It's rough, rugged, can lead to destruction. You know, and I say this oftentimes in lessons, that life presents a number of problems, even if we're trying to live righteously. I mean, here's Larson Plyler, young man. Here's a brain tumor, just discovered a couple days ago. Life has its ups and downs, even when we're trying to do right. But when we rebel against God, there are additional problems that come as a consequence of sin. You think about all kinds of problems that come. We see so many dysfunctional families, the breakdown of the family, what happens when alcohol is ingested, drugs, all kinds of things when people that oftentimes the spiritual laws and the natural laws go hand in hand. Not always, but oftentimes they do. And so the way of the transgressor is hard. It's hard oftentimes here, and it will be most hard where? In eternity. That's right. Any others in 13? What'd you say, Sandra? Or somebody? I'm Paula. 21. Evil pursueth sinners, but the righteous shall be recompensed with good. Yes, that's a good one. Verse 20, walk with wise men and thou shalt be wise, but the companion of fools shall smart for it. It's always good to have good people as our best friends, wise people. Don't ever be afraid to consult with someone who may know something more about a particular subject than we do. It's supposed to be something about guys that we never ask for directions. Is that right? I don't have that problem, or maybe if I can't find, of course, with GPS that's not really a problem much. But even in a grocery store, I was in a Home Depot today. It's so. If you see somebody has the apron on, hey, where is this? I'll go right to it. And it's not any kind of a weakness to ask for help. Again, a lot of these are all proverbs spiritual in nature. No, a lot of them are just generally how to live a better life.
Number 24, not necessarily spiritual, but according to that, my father loved me all.
Yeah, yes. He that spares his rod hates his son, but he that loveth him chasteneth him betimes, or often, diligently. Yes. Spareth his rod, hates his son. There was a lady in Richmond, Virginia, I remember, who Lee had to spank West's little legs quite often, and she just thought that was the most terrible thing to do, to spank a child. Of course, she was an old maid; she never had any children, and I quoted that to her. He that spareth his rod hateth his son, and she just kind of shook her head. That I think that's one of the problems in schools now, where teachers are told you don't even touch the child, and you know why all that's come about. But I've compared children to Israel in the Old Testament. Israel could understand a lot of spiritual things because of the physical punishments, the physical blessings. And a little child who, sticks his hand or somewhere and then again, a little harder, they get the point. And it's not child abuse. Certainly it's not. It can be, but it's not what Solomon was talking about. Okay. Chapter 14:29. He that is slow to anger is of great understanding, but he that is hasty of spirit exalteth folly. Slow to anger. Is that a New Testament principle? Yes. Any others in this? Well, look at 34. That's a good one. Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. And we see that, don't we, in our own country? And verse 12, there's a way that seems right, but the end unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. That's repeated. You may have a marginal reading where it's, 1625. Yes. Any others in that chapter? All right. 15:1, a soft answer turns away wrath, but a grievous word stirs up anger. That's generally speaking. We just don't have time to go into much of this, but any others through chapter 21? Any others that you see that you just want to call attention to? I remember when we were in Richmond, Virginia, we had a house class, or a class that met in a home. And we went through Proverbs, and it seemed like I think we met once a month, and we might have covered one verse a month. And it would take you forever to do it that way. All right, let's stop, and I hope the readings are helpful to you as they are to me. All right, in our, what, did somebody say something? Was that you, Charlie? No. Okay. All right, in our what to remember life of Jesus, we're trying to see God manifested. Do you remember a verse that says that no man has seen God at any time? The only begotten who's in the bosom of the Father, he hath declared him. Where's that? What book? Just tell me what book. Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John? John. Good. Can you tell me a chapter? We're getting hot. Patty, you look like you're... Oh, Kirsten. Okay, good. Kirsten, you remember?
Is it John 3? It's in the beginning.
Yeah, real beginning.
First chapter?
Yeah. It's at the end of the prologue. Look at it, 118. Just read that for us in your translation.
No one has ever seen God, the only God who is at the Father's side. No one has ever seen God, the only God who is at the Father's side. He has made him known.
Yes, he has made him known. And so when we're thinking about who Jesus is, we're seeing this is God in human form. So he came, that was one of his purposes for coming to earth, to declare who God is. And obviously to teach, and in his teaching manifest what God expects and what we can be. And then certainly to die sacrificial death and be raised to give us a perfect what that we might follow. A perfect example, 1 Peter 2:21. And so those purposes are generally speaking the big purposes why Jesus came. Now, in our going through the life of Jesus, we had the years of what? Preparation, beginning ministry, then the great Galilean, and now we're in these periods of retirement. And he's retiring for the crowds because of why? What's that, Patty?
His guests come and he's spending more time with the apostles.
That's right. And there was a problem too. What was the problem? People were following him for the wrong reasons. And so he's spending more time with his disciples, less time, and with those who are just following to see a carnival sideshow or something like that. But as he's doing that, then those who are diligently seeking him are coming. Yes, sir.
Think about here, he's got his 12, and he's knowing, I'm fixing to go. I'm going to
Yes.
be gone, and I got to teach him as much as I can, and make them understand as much as I can in the short time he's got left.
Exactly. And he doesn't have but about a year. All right. Here, we're just going to go on this mount. And this fourth retirement, he's come back to, remember in Dalmanutha, he had been arguing with the Pharisees and Sadducees. They said, show us a sign from heaven. Yeah. And then he warns them on the way up to Bethsaida, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and scribes. And they're thinking, oh, we forgot to take bread. Then he gets to Bethsaida and he heals the blind man in a kind of an unusual way. And then from there, he goes on up to Caesarea Philippi, where he announces the establishment of the church, which is where I'm pointing. And then he predicts his death and resurrection plainly for the first time. And yet those who will put him to death, he'll come back and judge. And then after that, he travels northward to Mount Hermon, where he's transfigured before the three apostles? Peter, James, and John. And they hear, well, he's transfigured, and who appears with Jesus? What two Old Testament characters? Moses and Elijah. About what are they talking? His decease that was to be accomplished in Jerusalem. All right, so they come back down, and when they come back down, the apostles are wondering about Elijah. Well, yeah, Elijah's got to come first, and you're talking about dying. And he says Elijah has come, and they did to him what they'll eventually do to me. And then they understood he was talking about John the Baptist. All right, so from there he travels south from Mount Hermon. He heals the boy. The man comes to him and says, my boy has a demon. He's got all kinds of problems. He has seizures. He convulses. He's thrown in the fire, thrown in the water. And I brought him to your disciples, and what? They couldn't do anything about it. And so Jesus then casts the demon out. He convulses. He tears, in the older translation says, just convulsing. And then, but he's okay. One thing that man says, the Father says, he says, if you can do this, have compassion on us. And Jesus started out answering and says, if thou canst. With God, all things are possible. And then to his credit, he says, I believe, help my unbelief. There was lingering doubt. And evidently it was such a tragic case with this boy that the apostles were thinking, I'm not sure we can do this. We can heal a blind man or maybe raise somebody dead, but look at what all's happening to this fellow. So anyway, that happens. Did we not finish all of our questions on page 96 and 7 with all that? No, we didn't. We didn't get any questions? Okay, all right. Well, I know we read through and we talked about it at length. Well, let's just go through. On page 96, 7a, how long after the transfiguration did this event occur? The next what? Next day. What group of religious people were questioning? New American Standard says arguing with among the disciples, likely attempting to discredit Jesus. Scribes. When Jesus and the multitudes met, what question did he ask? What are you discussing or disputing with? What are you questioning? That, by the way, that's the same word is used in Acts 6 verse 4, that when the synagogue of the Libertines was disputing with Stephen, and they could not withstand the wisdom and the spirit by which he spoke. Same word. D, a man came up to Jesus kneeling before him and cried out. What was his problem? Well, it was not really his, but his son was demon possessed, and he asked Jesus' disciples to cast the demon out, and they couldn't. All right, now in E, what I intended to do is try to just show how bad this fellow was, this boy. Matthew 17, verse 15, what was his problem? Yes, and there's a word that's used also to describe him. Epileptic, yes, epilepsy, seizures, and that goes hand in hand with his problem. In Mark 9:17, he was also mute, so he had seizures, epileptic. The seizures would take him in water, sometimes in fire. He couldn't speak. Mark 9:18.
Got still. If you've ever seen anybody having a seizure, that's
Exactly what happens. Yes. Mark 9:22. The demon throw him into the fire and the water and attempt to destroy him. In Luke 9:39, he would cry out, scream. And what was that, Janet?
He convulses and foams at the mouth.
That's right. Good. All right. So, again, there were several things that went together with this demon possession and the convulsing the seizure, and then what would happen as a consequence.
So it was just different from other demon possessed people.
Evidently so. Evidently it was just a tougher case, because the apostles seemed like they were stumped over it, and they weren't on some other things. In fact, they came back to Jesus and they were kind of, I wouldn't say proud of themselves, but they were kind of amazed that even the demons were subject to them. That's in Luke 10. And he says, don't be so overwhelmed about that. He said, what you need to rejoice over is that your names are enrolled in heaven. All right.
He told them that it required much fasting and prayer.
Yes, yeah, and said it was their lack of faith that couldn't do it. All right, and that's Elf. Jesus blamed the inability of the disciples to cast out demons on their little faith. And I mentioned in the note, we'll take just a second to read that. There's a big difference between the real miracles of Jesus and supposed faith healers of our day. Whenever faith healers are unable to perform a miracle or of healing on a person, they blame that person, that is the victim, his lack of faith or her lack of faith. Jesus blamed the ones who had the power to perform miracles for their lack of faith when they could not perform a miracle. And not only is it the lack of faith, but when a miracle was performed, it was due to the faith. Of course, it's the power of God, but the one through whom God worked, it was that person's faith in God. Turn over real quickly. The passage that immediately comes to mind is Acts, the 3rd chapter. Whoever has verse 16 first, read it. Acts 3:16. The case is Peter had just healed the lame man, lame from his mother's womb, and now he's on Solomon's porch and he's telling all these people how this has happened. Whoever has it first, go.
By faith in his name hath his name made this man strong, whom ye behold and know. Yea, the faith which is through him hath given him this perfect soundness in the presence of you all.
Yes, by faith in his name, that's Christ, has his name made this man well. Our faith in Christ is through Christ that this man has been able to be healed. And so it's the faith of the people who are working these miracles, not the faith of the one, and especially people who are dead, didn't even know what's going on. All right, on what occasion have we earlier seen that faith in the one accomplishing the miracle was necessary for the miracle to occur? Who's that in Matthew 14? Peter, walking on the water there. According to Mark 9, Jesus asked the Father how long this had occurred. His Father said since he had been a child. Therefore, Jesus indicated the power necessary for curing him. That's where Jesus would have known. He didn't need that to ask that question for information, but he asked so they would understand the power that he could exert. The Father further makes a statement that indicates some doubt mixed with his faith, which provides the occasion for Jesus' response. First, what was the Father's statement? If you can. You must do everything. Have compassion on us and help us. Jesus said what? All things are possible if we believe. Recognizing his need for more faith, the Father said, I believe, help my still lingered likely. K, Jesus rebuked the spirit. When he came out of the sun, it threw him into a terrible convulsion. Then he looked like he was dead. Yes, I think the King James used the word pine away. But it's the idea of convulsing. Jesus and the disciples went into a house apart. What did they ask Jesus? Why can't we do that? Yeah. And his response was it was due to their lack of faith. Okay. On the next page, we'll not read that note. Jesus told the apostles that faith sufficient to cast out such demons comes by what? Prayer and fasting. Yeah. Devotion is the idea behind it, I think. More consecration. Prayer helped the apostles to exercise their faith just as it does us. After Jesus cast out this demon, what was the reaction among the multitudes? They were all what? Amazed. Yeah. Amazed at the majesty of God. All right, the miracle shows Jesus' power over physical sickness as well as the spirit world. Also emphasizes the purpose of these miracles was to remove any doubt that Jesus was God's Son. We're seeing that in every area of human experience, Jesus has power over it, whether it be mental difficulties, blindness, mute, deaf, paralysis. In fact, during the time when Jesus will be captured by the mob on the night that he was betrayed, Jesus even does what to Malchus' servant's ear? He reattaches it after somebody cuts it off. Peter, yeah, cuts it off, and Jesus reattaches it without sutures. And so you've got all of these things going on and when he walks on water, he's defying the laws of gravity, buoyancy. When he calms a storm, it says, peace, be still, hush up. Then all the power of nature is behind Jesus. So all of these, back in Mark 2 real quickly, I don't mean to rehash all this, but Mark 2, when the 4 men let the paralytic down, they tore up the tile in the roof and let him down, and Jesus commended their faith, and he said, son, thy sins be forgiven. Oh, and that stirred up the crowd there. Only God can forgive sins. And so then he says, so that you might know that the Son of Man has power on earth to forgive sins, he told the paralytic, take up your bed and walk. So here, all of the physical signs, the physical maladies that people had that Jesus healed, all of those things indicated he had power spiritually to take care of all of our needs. He's got power over life, yes, but what's most important is spiritual life. And he has, if he can do one, he can do the other, because only who can do either? God. Yeah. Okay. All right. There are only just a few verses here in this next section. In Matthew 17, 22 and 23. Let's just read these. Angela, if you would read Matthew 17, 22, 23. Sister Eleanor, Mark 9, 30 through 32. And Sister Billy, Luke 9, 43 through 45. Now remember, they're still around in Galilee, and they're on their way back to Caesarea Philippi from Mount Hermon. Okay? Matthew 17, 22 and 23.
When all they were gathering together in Galilee, Jesus said to them, the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him, and he will be raised on the third day. And they were deeply grieved.
Yeah. They were deeply grieved, exceeding sorry. Same thing he says basically in 16:21. Now, all of this is right after the transfiguration, when God said, this is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased. And yet, I'm going to have to die, and the third day they'll be raised up. All right, Mark 9, Sister Eleanor.
And they departed thence and passed through Galilee, and he would not that any man should know of. For he taught his disciples and said unto them, the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of men, and they shall kill him. And after that he is killed, he shall rise the third day. But they understood not that saying, and were afraid to ask him.
Yeah, on this occasion they were afraid. They didn't understand. Luke's account will say that it was concealed from them, but they just could not see how this could occur, and yet they were afraid to ask him. I wonder why they were afraid to ask. Yeah, I think that's pretty evident. But the stern rebuke that Jesus offered Peter, get thee behind me, Satan. Yeah. You don't mind the things of God, but the things of men. And so, we remember what happened when the last time somebody said, oh Lord, no, let's never happen to you. So they're sorry, they're deeply grieved. They didn't understand how it would all occur, but we're not going to ask any questions either. And Sister Billy, let's read Luke's account here.
And
Luke,
they-
yeah,
and
I'm
they
sorry.
were all amazed at the mighty power of God. But while they wondered, everyone at all these things which Jesus did, he said unto his disciples, Let these sayings sink down into your ears, for the Son of Man shall be delivered into the hands of men. But they understood not this saying, and it was hid from them, that they perceived it not, and they feared to ask him of that saying.
All right, a couple of things on this. It's interesting that some of our translations will have in verse 43, they were all astonished at the majesty of God, but then it starts another paragraph in the middle of the verse. It's interesting that Jesus had just, he'd been talking about, or had healed this man's son, and they're all astonished at the majesty of God. And the B part of verse 43, but while all were marveling at the things which he did, he said, you get that scene before you. Can you believe what he is doing? I've never seen it. We know how long this young man has been suffering so grievously with all these difficulties, and his father's been concerned, and they're just on and on editorializing like we would. Oh, it's been so terrible. Can you imagine the great power that he exercised? And as they are saying that, he's saying what? I'm going to die. It's all happening at one time. And I think that makes it even more powerful, that he is showing them, pounding it in them, that he let these words sink deeply in your minds. That's more powerful than saying, listen up, guys. Let these words sink deeply. When somebody says, let this sink, we don't say sink deeply. You ever heard people say, this point has got to sink in your thick skull? You've heard that before, your mind. This has got to sink in. This is extremely important, and you need to contemplate, you need to consider exactly what I'm saying, the significance of it.
But they had just watched him do something they couldn't do.
Yes.
And now he's going to die.
Exactly. And so, yes. So you've got the deity of Jesus, and yet the deity, the human body is going to be put to death. So you got all of that fused together in these little events. Okay, let's answer our questions, guys. 8a, there, page 97. While still in Galilee and before they departed for Judea, which gives some indefinite time, but likely a few weeks, indicating these words were often repeated, Jesus said he had to do what? We just mentioned it. He had to go be delivered up by the hands of men, be killed, and the third day be raised. What does Jesus say to emphasize plainly his future? We just mentioned it. Let these words sink deeply into your ears. The reaction from the disciples is different from this time from the first announcement. Then Peter rebuked the Lord. Now what is their reaction? They're sorry, deeply grieved. Why didn't they ask him more about it? Next question. Well, they didn't understand, but they were what? Somebody said it back in the back. They were afraid. That's right. They were afraid. And I mentioned in the note, likely from their own sorrow as well as Peter's earlier experience, they were afraid to ask any more about the subject. All right. Now, I think we got time to do the next one. This is only found in Matthew's account. And again, they're on their way to Capernaum. I want you to notice up here real briefly. We've been, Bethsaida, where the blind man was healed. Caesarea Philippi, announcement of the establishment of the church. I've got to die, but I'm going to be a judge and a king. Then Mount Hermon, where he's transfigured. Comes down from the mount. They're talking about Elijah. He gets down from the mount, and there's the man with the epileptic son. And then we have the event that we just discussed here. So he's on his way back to returning to Capernaum, which was his headquarters. And we know that they've come here by the time this event happens, because Jesus tells Peter to put your hook in the In the sea, yeah. All right, let's turn to Matthew 17 and read this account now. Sister Janet, if you would, Matthew 17, 24 through the end.
When they had come to Capernaum, those who received the temple tax came to Peter and said, "Does your teacher not pay the temple tax?" And he said, "Yes." And when he had come to the house, Jesus anticipated him, saying, "What do you think, Simon? From whom do the kings of the earth take customs or taxes? From their sons or from strangers?" Peter said to him, "From strangers." Jesus said to him, "Then the sons are free. Nevertheless, lest we offend them, go to the sea, cast in a hook, and take the fish that comes up first. And when you have opened its mouth, you will find a piece of money. Take that and give it to them for me and you."
Okay, only found in Matthew. He's come now to where? We just mentioned it? Capernaum. And someone asked Peter, does your master pay the half shekel? The American Standard says, and some of your translations may use the word didrachma. Is that in the New American Standard does? I think the English Standard, Kirsten, and it was a form of money. 4 of them made, I think, a stater, and then part of that was a denarii. And anyway, only a half shekel was what was actually part of the law. That and it goes all the way. And we've got a note on that. It goes all the way back to Exodus, the 30th chapter. Let's turn back and see the nature of this real quickly. Let's turn back to Exodus 30. Exodus 30, and the paragraph starts in verse 11, but 12 through 16 is that paragraph. Brother Gene, do you have that? Exodus 30, 12 through 16.
When you take a census of the sons of Israel to number them, then each one of them should give a ransom for himself to the Lord. When you number them, so that there will be no plague among them when you number them. This is what everyone who is numbered shall give, half a shekel according to the shekel of the sanctuary. The shekel is 20 gerahs. Half a shekel is the contribution to the Lord. Everyone who is numbered from 20 years old and over shall give the contribution to the Lord. The rich shall not pay more, and the poor shall not pay less than half shekel when you give the contribution to the Lord and make atonement for yourselves. You shall take the atonement money from the sons of Israel and give it for the service of the tent of meeting, that it may be a memorial for the sons of Israel before the Lord, to make atonement for yourselves.
All right, good, thank you. So it was a half shekel, and who was responsible for giving this? Everybody who was 20 years of age are accountable before them. And it was for the purpose of what?
The upkeep of the tabernacle.
Right, the service of the tent of meeting. That's down in verse 16. But it was called something else, into verse 15. Atonement, yeah, verse 16 rather. Thou shalt take the atonement money. So it was for the purpose of the upkeep of the tabernacle, later the temple. And it didn't matter if you were rich or poor, everybody was responsible for a half shekel.
It was the males that were responsible.
Yes, males were responsible.
That was the least they could give.
Yes. What's one thing that's interesting? Some have wondered about, why the rich shall not give more, the poor shall not give less. And some have kind of postulated, well, it could have been very well could have been the idea that God wanted them to see the equal value of everyone's soul, whether poor or rich. Maybe, the Bible doesn't say, but whatever the case was, everyone was supposed to pay a half shekel. All right, let's go. We find Joash asking to take all that up there in the passage that I have mentioned in 2 Chronicles 24. So when Jesus comes down here to Capernaum, Peter was asked, does your teacher pay the half shekel? And Peter just answered immediately what? Oh, yeah, he does that. And then he comes into the house, and Jesus already knows about the conversation, and then he illustrates it by the fact, he illustrates the point that he actually did not or did have to pay the half shekel.
They didn't know.
He did not have to, because the temple tax was paid for the upkeep of the temple. But the temple was to honor God. And Jesus is deity. He is God in that sense, the Godhood. But so in that sense, he didn't have to do it. But he didn't want to cause anybody to do what? To stumble or give offense to anyone. So then he provides a miracle. He tells Peter, you go to the sea, throw in your hook, the first fish that comes up, take it, and when you open up its mouth, it's going to have a shekel in it, a whole shekel, but they only had to pay what? The half shekel. So you take that and give for me as well as for you. That's the point here. And we got some questions on this, and we'll probably have to stop after this. For what was this money used? We've already answered that. 9a. That's a temple tax, yes. Did Jesus lawfully have to pay the money? No. Why? He was the king's son in this illustration. And I mentioned the argument is this: if sons of kings are exempt from paying tribute or taxes, Jesus, being the Son of God, was also exempt from paying that which went to God, since the half shekel was given for the upkeep of God's temple. Why then did Jesus pay it? To keep any from stumbling. Yeah, it's interesting. Stumbling is going to be a real key to Matthew 18. Let's make sure it's almost like this is one of those shingles, we don't want to make anybody stumble. Then all of a sudden, the apostles have been arguing over who's going to be first in the kingdom. And so Jesus takes this little child up and he says, except you turn and become as little children, you'll know what. And don't cause anyone to stumble. That's the next section that we've got coming up. Jesus knew some would misunderstand this and likely infer they could set aside that command. E on the next page, what was unusual about the way he produced the money for his taxes? We've already gone over that. He told Peter to do what?
Go cast the line, it'll be in the fish's mouth.
That's right, and he did. And I've got a couple of notes and an overall note from Matthew 14 through 17. I mentioned that first note, the way Jesus paid the tribute money indicated that rather than his need to pay tribute, the whole realm of nature paid tribute to him. And the second note, besides the miracle of the fish with a shekel, another miracle involved Jesus knowing that Peter had been asked whether he, that is Jesus, paid the half shekel before Peter entered the house where Jesus was. Miraculous knowledge, we've seen that in other cases, but miraculous knowledge as well as his power over nature are seen here. One quick idea I might just share with you. I've thought about this passage. When you visit, let's say you visit another congregation, if I go for a meeting or something, I usually try to contribute. If I don't leave a check here beforehand, if something keeps me from doing that, I'll double up after when I get back. But the thing is, when I'm away, when we're visiting away, we really, I think, have responsibilities as local congregations where we are. But do you see you know where I'm going with this, don't you? When you're away if I'm preaching, I'm sitting on the front row of a congregation, and there are little people all maybe watching, and you're right there, and the contribution basket's passed around, and you don't give. What could somebody think? What could they think?
It's not important.
What's that?
It's not important.
It's not important. Brother Philip doesn't give. I don't have to give. And so, generally speaking, I may take something small, but I'll just to try to keep, basically for appearance. And you help the work wherever you go, but I don't want somebody to think I don't believe I need to give. And you give at home, give the local congregation, you're doing what the Lord wants you to do, but you don't want to do anything that could cause a person from stumbling. And I think that especially goes into chapter 18. Comment, question? This is probably a good place to stop. Let's stop and we'll have a great chance to pick up with this. I want to keep your mind on, in Mark and Luke's account, you've got the idea in this next section of what leads to the extended teaching in Matthew 18. Matthew 18 is a longer teaching on stumbling and causing a brother to sin. But really it's what leads into it, anticipates it, is the fact that they're arguing over who's going to be number one. And even John says, Lord, this fellow casting, he's got miraculous powers and he's not following after us. And so that's kind of what leads really into this next section. All right, thank you for your help.